Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Joining us tonight from Washington, D.C. to talk about Turkey's foreign policy after the June 24th presidential and parliamentary elections is Merve Tahiroğlu, who is a research associate at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good evening, Ms. Tahiroğlu. Welcome once again to This Week in Turkey.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
So as you're based in Washington, D.C., let's start with how these election results and the re-election of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan were received in D.C. What do you think these results mean for the future of Turkey-U.S. relations?
So they were received in the same way that I think they were received in Turkey, which was that the results were both surprising and not surprising at the same time. What that means is that Washington has been very aware that this was a very important election for President Erdogan. It is the election that will help usher in on Monday, this coming Monday, the new presidential system that he helped build and wants to see in the future of Turkey. So we did expect President Erdogan to win again the election. We didn't think that he would go into an election that he himself figured that he might lose. At the same time, in the lead up to the elections, we saw a huge, vigorous movement and mobilization by the opposition parties. And I remember that a couple of days before the election, all the major newspapers in the United States, including the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, the editorial teams of these major publications were writing editorials in the lead up saying that the Turkish opposition might actually surprise us. We might see a departure of Mr. Erdogan, but of course that didn't happen. And so what we are left with now is a very clear message to the United States and to Turkey as well, that one, Turkish electorate is pretty divided. It's still around 50-50 in its support for Mr. Erdogan, its designs for Turkey, but also the other half of Turkey very much opposes Erdogan. And what we saw here was that they were willing to actually come across ideological and political spectrum and unite together in order to oppose him in this particular election. And that half of Turkey lost. But the second message, of course, is that even with the 5%, Erdogan is the clear winner, and the new presidential system that he will now usher in means that he will be the sole ruler of Turkey moving forward. But also domestically, as we know from the parliamentary elections and the results of those, is that he will also be ruling with an alliance with the ultra-nationalist MHP party. And so from Washington's perspective, this will be, moving forward for the next 5 years, will be a government that is a coalition between, or an alliance between ultra-nationalists and Islamists. And that will set the agenda and set the tone for Turkey's foreign policy relations with the United States, which means I think we'll have difficult days and years coming ahead.
So let's continue now with an issue that's been a key problem area lately in U.S.-Turkey relations, namely the imprisonment of Andrew Brunson, who is an American pastor and is facing up to 35 years in prison for terrorism and espionage-related charges. How do you think the outcome of these elections will affect, or will have, what kind of an impact will they have on the case of Brunson? And how key is this issue really for U.S.-Turkey relations, in your opinion?
Well, it's pretty key, and it's increasingly at the center of U.S.-Turkish relations, in part because the reactions come from the U.S. Congress. Congress has been quite upset about Pastor Brunson's arrest, in part because they have reviewed the indictment, and when they look at the investigative reports and they look at the treatment Pastor Brunson has been subjected to while in prison and throughout his legal process, they don't see due process, and they don't see that Turkey that values rule of law. And the charges against him appear very dubious. They don't seem to be grounded on valid facts, for the reasons why Congress especially quite concerned. If you remember, a couple days after the election, there were actually Senators and Shaheen to visit President Erdogan in Turkey, and they discussed the case of Pastor Brunson. He, I believe, is set to his next court date, next trial date on the 18th, on July 18th, so that's about 2 weeks. Let's see what happens there. Reportedly, some diplomats in Ankara expect him to be deported now that after the election, Erdogan's hands are a bit stronger and he can make moves more easily. But actually, I would doubt that, and I'm not sure that there are any incentives right now for Erdogan or for Turkey to Mr. Brunson. But certainly Congress and Washington will be watching how the trial unfolds. I say that this is an important issue because there is a large bloc in Congress that is very much watching this case very closely. This is a very important issue for Americans, especially for the evangelical community, which is an influential community in Washington. And that's why this pastor's case has been a major issue here. And of course, these concerns even made it to some legislation before the election, and before the Turkish election here in the U.S. Congress. They made it into the bill for the next defense budget spending, which of course raised issues that have to do with S-400 and F-35s. But Congress has been considering even sanctions on Turkey if this problem isn't resolved with the case. So I think everyone will be tuning into the Turkish trial on July 18th.
Mm-hmm. And let's get to Syria now, which is another vital component of Turkish-American relations lately. How do you think Turkey and U.S. will proceed with their policies on Syria in the coming period after the elections? Is cooperation likely, in your opinion?
Well, yes, so actually those senators, Bam and Shane, after visiting Mr. Erdogan, talking about Brunson, they went to also visit Babic. So I think this is pretty telling of what are the most important issues, especially for the U.S. Congress, when they look at Turkey-U.S. relations. It's both northern Syria and Brunson. In northern Syria, so there have been some progress between the sides of trying to build with this new plan that they are implementing and reach. They're trying to build some confidence, and Turkish side has been arguing. I think they just completed the 10th round of patrolling around the city. Moving forward, there will be discussions between the two sides, the future makeup of the Merve Military Council, how that might look like, because that council has been currently dominated by the YPG, which of course is a major problem for Turkey, even unacceptable. So there will be more further talks on that issue and how the future of the Military Council to rule over the city will be like, and what the role of the YPG there will be. But this is what we see right now is the Turkish side is calling it cooperation. But if we look at the respect coming from both sides, the fact that these talks are being discussed around the idea of confidence building, to me means this is less about cooperation between the two sides and more about crisis management. And in the long run, that's not really good news for Turkey, because what we see here is the United States clearly sees the YPG in northern Syria as its relationship with this group from a tactical point of view, but also I think over the last few years we've been seeing that the U.S. is treating Turkey more of a tactical ally as well, and that's the bad news for Turkey.
And last but not least, let's get to Turkey's relations with the European Union. As you know, Turkey's relations were strained not only with the US, but also with a number of EU governments in the period before the elections. And what should we expect for the near future after the elections?
So I think Turkey's accession talks have been tabled for the foreseeable future for now. The fact that Turkey is now moving towards an AKP-MHP alliance, and what that means for the West in general, not just for the United States, but what that communicates is an alliance between Islamist and ultra-nationalists in Turkey. This is national front for Turkey. This is to be problematic and straining for Turkey's relationship with the EU as well, with the West overall in general. The West is going to be, and the EU is going to be looking at a Turkey with a strong leader who's trying to dictate much of the decision coming out of Turkey in its foreign policy, a leader who's interested in more of a diplomacy based on trade and culture. And what that means is just in the same way we discussed Turkey's relationship with the US deteriorating into tactical. I think we'll see more of a tactical relationship between Turkey, where the two sides will just try to resolve issues one by one, take them as a case by case, and look at the wins that they can get from each other. But I don't know that we will be able to see any kind of larger, broader cooperation or acting in tandem on broader issues. I think it's going to be more taken every issue to be contentious.
Thank you, Ms. Tahiroğlu, for your comments and for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
The official results of the June 24th parliamentary and presidential elections were announced by the Supreme Board of Elections on Wednesday.
Turkey's June 24th twin elections were announced by the Supreme Board of Elections on Wednesday. In the presidential poll, President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan won the election with 52.59% of the total votes. The president's chief rival from the main opposition Republican People's Party (CHP) was Muharrem İnce, who won 30.64% of the votes. The breakdown of the remainder of the votes is as follows. People's Democratic Party HDP's JL candidate Selahattin Demirtaş, 8.4%. Good Party's candidate Meral Akşener, 7.29%. Felicity Party's candidate Temel Karamollaoğlu, 0.89%. Homeland Party's candidate Doğu Perinçek, 0.20%. As for the parliamentary election results, the Supreme Board of Elections confirmed that Erdoğan's ruling Justice and Development Party AKP won 42% of the votes and gained 295 seats in the parliament, falling slightly short of an outright majority. But the AKP's partner, the Nationalist Movement Party, won 49 seats, giving the ruling party-led grouping a majority in the parliament. CHP won 146 seats in the parliament, remaining the main opposition party. HDP also retained its position as the second largest opposition party with 67 seats. Meanwhile, Akşener's newly formed right-wing Good Party will enter the parliament for the first time with 43 seats. The new parliament, which will be sworn in on July 7th, has 600 seats, up from 550 under the old system. In his second mandate, Erdoğan will have expanded powers under an executive presidency after constitutional changes were approved in a referendum last year. He will be able to directly appoint top public officials, including ministers and vice presidents, as the post of premier is removed. According to critics, the new system will lead to a one-man rule, but Erdoğan argues that the changes are needed to streamline decision-making and avoid chaotic governments.
Good Party's spokesperson Aytun Çıray said on Wednesday that the electoral alliance between his party, the Republican People's Party, and Felicity Party has now ended.
Good Party spokesperson Aytun Çıray said on Wednesday that the National Alliance, formed by the opposition for the June 24th elections, is no longer necessary. With the end of the elections, there is currently no need for this electoral alliance. The Good Party will produce its own special politics under its own legal personality and share it with the Turkish nation, Çıray told reporters after a party meeting. The alliance between the Good Party, Republican People's Party (CHP), and the Felicity Party was not a coalition, but a cooperation, Çıray said. He added that the alliance targeted the prevention of electoral irregularities, and the common principle agreed on was an empowered multi-party parliamentary system. Felicity Party leader Temel Karamollaoğlu, meanwhile, voiced a similar approach. The alliance was an issue related to the general elections. The alliance has expired at that point, Karamollaoğlu said.
Main opposition Republican People's Party (CHP's) presidential candidate Muharrem İnce challenged his party's chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu to step down this week.
The in-house row in the main opposition Republican People's Party (CHP) has deepened this week, with the party's leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu rejecting a call from CHP's defeated presidential candidate Muharrem İnce for a snap convention demanding a change in leadership. "I am not going to make a call for an extraordinary convention because there is no need for one," Kılıçdaroğlu said on Wednesday. "I think there is a special effort to spark controversy within the CHP so that the fall in the votes of the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, is kept out of the discussion," he said. The row inside the CHP grew after İnce said on Tuesday that in their first in-person meeting after the elections, he proposed Kılıçdaroğlu to step down from the leadership and become the honorary president through a change passed in a snap Congress. Kılıçdaroğlu said his meeting with İnce had been a private family gathering, so it was political indecency for İnce to reveal the content of their conversation. However, İnce, who has decided to go on a tour across Turkey after the elections, reiterated his call on Kılıçdaroğlu and said, "We ate with the party leader in a brotherly relationship. I made a proposal and then I shared it with the public. I wanted everyone to know about it." The first stop of his tour was Erzurum, an eastern province which he was unable to visit during his pre-election rallies.
The government issued its last decree law today for the post-state of emergency period, as the state of emergency is scheduled to be lifted on July 18th.
Following the June 24th presidential and parliamentary elections, Turkey issued the first decree for the harmonization of the current legal framework for the new executive presidential system. The decree was published on the official Gazette on Wednesday. The 74-article decree stipulates the transfer of some powers of the cabinet to the president and abolishes the office of prime minister. This is the first of the 5,000-article change that will be amended to lift the prime ministry to replace it by the president. After President Erdogan announces his cabinet members early next week, all laws that stipulate ministries' organizational structure will be abolished by the cabinet. The new ministries and organizational framework of the system will then have to be determined based on a new decree to be issued by the president. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is expected to take his oath and announce his government on Monday. Under the new executive presidential system, the government will be formed of 16 ministries and 9 presidential councils.
According to official data announced by the Turkish Statistical Institute on Tuesday, Turkey's consumer price inflation rate jumped to a 14-year high and hit 15.39% last month.
Turkish consumer price inflation jumped to a 14-year high in June. Official data from the Turkish Statistical Institute showed on Tuesday, driving the lira down and putting pressure on the central bank to raise interest rates further this month. Inflation rose to 15.39% year-on-year, the highest annual rate since 2004, after a new method of calculating price rises was introduced. And the month-on-month consumer price index inflation leapt to a 2.61%, nearly doubling the forecasts. The rise was driven by food and non-alcoholic beverages, which rose by 5.98% on the month, and communication prices, which climbed 4.76%, the data showed. The data added further pressure on the lira, which has lost nearly 20% in value against the dollar this year. Turkey's central bank has raised its main policy rates by 500 basis points since April, in an effort to arrest an 18% fall in the lira this year, despite President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's opposition to higher rates. The Central Bank's Monetary Policy Committee is due to meet again on July 24th.
Now let's take a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
In cooperation with the Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts, Istanbul Modern Cinema is featuring a special program on the works of the Australian singer, songwriter, poet and actor Nick Cave before his much-awaited concert in Istanbul on July 10th. Cave will perform in Küçükçiftlik Park as part of the ongoing Istanbul Jazz Festival, which is celebrating its 25th edition this year. Cave's voice, music and text will be screened in a program titled A Weekend with Nick Cave throughout the weekend. The movies that will be offered within the scope of the program are The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, One More Time with Feeling, Lawless, and 20,000 Days on Earth. Shakira will meet with fans in Istanbul on July 11th for her 6th world tour, El Dorado, named after her latest album.
This year the Istanbul Jazz Festival is celebrating its 25th anniversary. We are very happy about that. So we tried to present a very colorful program, including biggest stars of the jazz and rock and international music scene, but also tried to explore different edges and different corners of the city with multiple venues. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds is probably the biggest name in our program this year. which is going to happen on the 10th of July at Küçük Çiftlik Park. And there are also several other international stars like Robert Plant, which is on the 17th. Melody Gardot already happened, and Benjamin Clementine, who is one of the rising stars of the singer-songwriter new folk scene or the urban music scene of the international world music scene, Kara Emerald. And there are also some very interesting young and new jazz projects, such as Bad Bad Not Good, which is coming to Istanbul for the first time, and the new project of Robert Glasper and Christian Scott, which is called R plus R equals now. And as the International Jazz as an international jazz festival happening in Istanbul, we try to present our concerts in different venues in Istanbul, like this one here in Sultan Park of Swiss Hotel, but we also use very interesting locations in the city, including Beykoz Kundra, which is an old factory at the Bosphorus, or Esma Sultan Mansion, right in the middle of Ortaköy, next to the sea, and trying to present a very diverse program for our audience.